Do you know President Zelensky is Jewish?
I didn't know. I don't know much about these foreign presidents. I don't pay much attention to foreign politics.
I am Ukrainian. I'm a citizen of Ukraine, so I can vote in Ukrainian elections.
And did you vote for Zelensky?
This is a question which is similar to the one: are you vaccinated or not? In its potential explosiveness. But I would say no. I did not vote. I did not vote for Zelensky. I did not vote for Poroshenko. I voted for someone different in those elections. I really felt that Ukraine should see a change in power. So I voted for someone. It's complicated, yeah. So let me say it's complicated. But I didn't vote for Zelensky. I did not vote for Poroshenko, who was a president before Zelensky.
It certainly is complicated. Did you know? Not that it must have anything to do with it. Did you know he was Jewish, Zelensky?
Of course, yes. Everyone in Ukraine knew it. Yeah, people who voted for him knew he was Jewish. But Jewish.
That's been going off since World War II, I think, hasn't it? Every Saturday at 1 p.m.
Every day at 1 p.m. I think.
What is it? What is it?
I think it's some kind of warning for the war.
It's called the 1 o'clock time signal. I didn't actually know it happened because I didn't come to Sheffield in the afternoon much until I started going to protests. Apparently, it was a historical thing before people had clocks and such a lot. It was to notify people when it's 1 o'clock.
All right, dinner time.
There are the people who, are like, oh yeah, I'm with Russia, as a joke, like thinking of all this as a joke to them. And they're like, oh, I sure hope this doesn't affect me. But then, down the line, if they don't do anything like change the way they're joking, like quote unquote joking, or things like that, it's, it's going to start affecting them.
What do you think this is all about today?
Mostly Ukraine, because there's currently a war on. Russia have invaded Ukraine. Although I'll admit I've not actually been paying that much attention to it, to be honest. Although it's been all over the news, so I've been paying a bit more attention to the news lately than I have for various other topics. I wonder whether you might be in Russia actually covering protests, because I gather they've been they've not liked the protests. I think Putin's trying to have people try and pretend that they're not happening, and he's made it illegal to push fake news and accusing the protests of being fake news.
Well, if Putin or Zelensky wanted to pay my airfare or travel, I might go and report on that, and I will still remain unbiased.
You could do. I think you'd do a good job of that, although you might be at risk of getting blown up at the moment.
You're from Syria?
Yeah, from Syria, yeah.
What do you want to tell people about Syria? What's going on in Syria right now?
Stop war in Syria. Stop war in Syria.
So there's a war currently going on in Syria?
Yeah.
And can you tell me more about that?
Putin is killer.
Who's that?
Putin.
I don't know much about Syria, so if you want to tell me a little bit more about it.
And for 11 years in Syrian war, but nobody speak about Syria. 10 million refugees, 1 million in prison, 1 million die.
So who's Syria fighting with?
Syria.
Or who is fighting with Syria? There's two sides.
Bashar Assad and Putin, killer people.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to understand because obviously I'm English and you're from Syria.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry I don't understand very well. But is there anything you want to say to other people besides what you've said now? Anything else?
I hope to stop war in Syria and in Ukraine and all the world. And I hope drop Bashar Assad to prison and Putin stop the war. I hope so. Thank you.
We are Ukrainians, so we have lots of family in Ukraine now, including in Kharkiv. So, some of our family are under Russian bombs there. So that's obviously a cause which is very close to, our hearts, and obviously. You know me from different kinds of protests.
Yeah, I've been before.
Yeah, I've
and it's
been
nice to hear people's points of views as well. And this one's close to home for you, isn't it?
Yes, very close. And for a Ukrainian, there can be no question about the side which is being bombed and side which suffers large civilian casualties should enjoy unconditional support. But I understand that in a highly divided world we are living and in a highly manipulated informational field we are living, it's very challenging. And I can see many people with whom I stood shoulder to shoulder for a year and a half on protests against irrational and cruel anti-COVID measures. I can see these people now taking a position which is very difficult for me to condone, and I just wish they were as critical to their sources as they were on sources of COVID, because most of the stuff they cite comes from Russian-owned state media, and if you are critical towards state-owned channels of communication, try to apply same logic to what you see. Don't be critical only about BBC and CNN. Other state media, other country state media will also have a state-run agenda.
Obviously, COVID's gone out the scene now, hasn't it?
It has, and I was talking to someone just last week or was it the week before? He said, have you noticed no mentions of coronavirus anywhere?
Hong Kong community here in Sheffield at the town hall supporting Ukrainian, because we are also suffering suppression by the Chinese Communist Party, who is also indirectly supporting this war, supporting Russia. So it is outrageous. And we think we need to try to do whatever we can, possibly, to stand with Ukrainian.
I've noticed some people, especially in the anti-lockdown people, tend to be pro-Russia, whereas it seems quite popular for people to be pro-Ukraine. So there'll be a bit of division, I think, on that.
President Zelensky, what could you tell me about him?
You see, unlike Britain, we don't have a well-established elite class in Ukraine. Ukraine has a very turbulent history, and a recent history has been very turbulent. So in Ukraine, the democracy is even less perfect than here, and it might result in really an ordinary person or almost anyone might end up in power. And people think that because he's outside from establishment, because he is not a politician, he did not have any experience in running a political party or any state department or anything, people sometimes see that this must have been arranged. Not at all. It's just because Ukrainians are still able to vote, and their votes result in direct results. They bring to power somebody they think might do better.
Yeah, do you think it might be because he was an actor and obviously a comedian?
Absolutely. Not only he was an actor and a comedian, he was an actor who starred in extremely successful sitcom called People's Servant, and he played a role of a history teacher who becomes unwillingly a president of Ukraine, and then has to struggle, has to wrestle with all those entrenched powers which try to manipulate him into, globalist powers, pro-Russian powers, oligarchs powers. He showed it all in that sitcom, and I think a lot of people related to that struggle against all these outside powers, and they thought, okay, you have a go now.
Well, I do agree with the no-fly zone, but then of course I'm also worried a bigger war will happen. But then on the other hand, I think even more sanctions, and even including cultural sanction, is important. Cultural sanction with Russia and cultural sanction with the Chinese Communist Party, who is backing Russia, secretly at the moment. I think those are really important things we should do immediately, because they're, it's not about violently breaking everything. Yeah.
I lived in Russia for 2 years, in 1998 until summer 2000. I lived in Russia. I have lots of family in Russia, and we sat around the table, you know, in New Year Eve. We sat around the table when President Yeltsin, addressing his nation, said, "I'm tired, I'm going to retire." You know, he still had a couple of years left on his term, and he said, "I'm going to retire, but don't worry, the country is going to be in safe pair of hands." And he said, "Let me introduce to you Mr. Putin, who is going to take over the country, and he's going to look after you." And I've seen it unfolding in front of my eyes, this Operation Successor, which was so neatly orchestrated. And I've also seen my relatives in Russia, like, you know, changing attitude towards him over these 23 years. And without, going into like too much of complicated matters, I think, as a rule of thumb, if someone is in power for 23 years, and if you want to be, if you want to have people exercising any power over any decisions made in their country, it's not good to have someone in power for 23 years. People of Russia did not have a chance to choose their president for 23 years. That's, it does something to your brain, it does something to your will to live, if you know whatever you think is not going to result in change of political power.
China itself is a very powerful country, isn't it?
And also very authoritarian. Yeah.
Do you see the Chinese authoritarian ways coming to the West at all?
I think it's not only CCP, but at the moment we do see this idea of authoritarian governance is spreading, expanding globally. So I think and not just the West, but anyone who love freedom and democracy and embrace the liberal values, we have to stand together to fight in this, fight for freedom, I would say. Yeah.
There is a Prime Minister as well as a President in Ukraine.
Yes.
What do you know of the Prime Minister in Ukraine?
We are a team with President. So Ukraine has seen so many Prime Ministers in its 30 years of independence. We change them almost as often as people in Britain do, except for Blair, of course, who managed to stay for quite a while. But Prime Ministers of Ukraine change at very frequent intervals, and this one seemed to be working in tandem with President. So I don't see, I think whatever weaknesses or fissures might have been there, they do seem to be put, in a back side of everyone's mind, because people are quite united.
We know the Chinese Communist Party, the president of the Chinese Communist Party has previously, before the war, dealt with Putin. And of course, we don't know the detail of the deal, but then obviously Russia delayed the war to be postponed after the Winter Olympics. And then they got a lot of the trade deal between Russia and CCP. So in this case, at least we know China is supporting Russia in this war. So I think, it is important to also culturally sanction, economically sanction the Chinese Communist Party in this case.
What do you think is the answer to all this problem in Ukraine now, the war?
The answer to, you mean what is...
How would we resolve this? How would it be resolved in your view?
Well, obviously, you see, you're asking a Ukrainian, you're asking someone who, as I already mentioned, has family under bombs and friends sending their wives and children out of country, and it's so I'm not a state woman. I don't have experience of resolving country-sized conflict. So you're talking here to an ordinary citizen, and as an ordinary citizen, I wish Russian troops out as soon as possible, because it's just, they are dying, my people are dying. Ukrainians are going to resist until, last man standing. That's much I know about my nation.
Stand with Ukraine, and we all know that all the Hong Kong people and even the lovely Chinese citizens who cannot speak up, maybe they also would like to fight for freedom. And so we Hong Kong people here in the UK, as we have the freedom to demonstrate, we are here to say this, because we know our friends in Hong Kong, they cannot go out to protest at the moment. They cannot even express their will to stand with Ukraine. Yeah, thank you.
I don't think we know all the facts, and we all know what we are fed, curated, information, and there can be, particularly at a time of war, the reasons to do it can be quite legitimate. I don't know whether the outcomes are desirable, but for example, I'm very worried about, I think it's troubling what Facebook and Twitter are going to relax their rules around hate speech and allow violent, people who wish violent deaths on Russian elite and Russian troops. That worries me, because it's only you might think it's good because it's plays. If you expect me to say, oh, this is good because it plays to my cause, I would say no, I don't think it's good. I think it has to be the information has to be free, and people have to. It's important that people are free to express what they think.
If I can find a Russian person around here, I will ask them for an interview. So thank you for your interview. I just want to ask you about the West. Do you think the West can do more than what they're doing with sanctions?
Clearly, they can do more with sanctions. That's absolutely, it's transparent, as it's a daylight. I don't know if you have a saying in English, daylight vision. You can see it as in daylight, but clearly they are trying to get as bright as day. Thank you. But they are trying to get out of this situation with as little damage to their reputation, to their business interests, and to some other interests as little damage as possible.